And at the end of the year, I went to the principal and I said, you know, this is the telecom port of the United States. I was teaching arithmetic to high school kids who are graduating. They're not going to be able to take advantage of anything happening here. He's like, that's fine, that's perfectly acceptable to me. And it was there that I began to see and understand how you could have a huge meta goal at an economic level, and then politically and programmatically have a very different goal for some set of people. And that misalignment is what spurred me on to do my own research. And so St. Louis wants to be the biotechnology hub of the United States. I was describing how we have probably about 700 doctoral students in the biomedical sciences at Washington University alone in our division of biomedical sciences. We have a Cortex quarter where we're building housing and doing all kinds of fabulous things to advance this. My question is, what are we doing for the people indigenous to the community to give them access to that opportunity? It's not always received very well. But it's an important question we should ask. And then finally, this one doesn't have a number. What are the costs and benefits associated with success or failure? Right? We should always be keeping up what does it cost, because you need to be able to talk to people about that as researchers. So I'm going to try to do that, a little bit of that today. So the thing that's grounded me in thinking about St. Louis and the way I've organized the studies I've always done there is sort of depicted in this graphic. And every time I do a study, I'm probably looking at one or two of the relationships that are there. In community, I know there's a relationship between the community and the schools. It's either a positive or negative relationship. I mean, either the schools are doing really well and it's adding value to the community, or the schools are doing poorly and it's a negative. Doing really well, folks matriculate to post-secondary education of some sort. And if that works out real well, they go to the workforce, develop social capital, they add positive social benefits in terms of family support, tax revenue, and political support. If the relationship is negative, generally it results in some type of dropout. Those people end up in prison on welfare, and really with health disparities it costs us a lot of money. And they feed back into the community as a negative in terms of human capital. They don't have a lot of money for tax revenue to pay into the system. They're really a tax negative, and they generally don't offer tremendous political support. Now imagine this happening over and over and over again. That's what you call St. Louis. So if we're in the negative over and over again on that side, what does that look like over time? If it's positive, you should call those affluent suburbs that have lots of retail and property values that are high, great schools, it feeds over. It's like Winnetka, you know, or somewhere like that. You know, and that reinforces itself. And these things are happening in real time across space. Now, I was very satisfied with myself with this particular model and doing my studies until I moved to St. Louis. And then I realized I was missing something. I didn't know what I was missing until I thought about it. The model is great because it deals with time and order. It's very big. It's intergenerational. I can do place-based analysis with it. I can use census data and school district data, and I can analyze things from a multi-institutional perspective. The limitation of the model is it doesn't deal with social relations at all. It doesn't deal with race and place. And it certainly doesn't deal with families and conflict. And absent that, you would never understand St. Louis if you didn't understand social relations, race and place, and families and context. And so it has some strengths, but it's very limited. And so you have to have something else. So I tried to figure out when trying to figure out St. Louis, what could I do? I went to one of your colleagues, Steve, actually from Michigan, who had done some work in desegregation, Anderson and Jones. And basically they capture St. Louis and the limitations of my model very well. There were policies that led to white flight and racial housing discrimination in St. Louis. That led to greater segregation. For blacks, it led to lower home values and separation from policy influencers. They then have lower tax base, less money for schools and training, They have poor job opportunities as a result. Businesses leave and don't want to come to those environments. High poverty is the result. High poverty is associated with poor health outcomes and limited access to health care. And then that further reinforces poor educational outcomes. And so this better captures St. Louis than my initial capture of it, but I've got to show it to you. So I use both and I try to do studies that look at each one of these pieces. I'm going to show you bits and pieces of each one today, just to get your juices flowing. So culturally, I'm into culture. I have an appointment in American Culture Studies. When I meet my math friends, I go to American culture. And I don't think anything better captures. How many of you have seen Leave It to Beaver? Some of you, and this is very age dependent. Some of you Netflix download Leave It to Beaver. So you need to understand Leave It to Beaver to understand what I'm going to talk about today. All right? And I know some of you like, that's crazy, right? Leave It to Beaver. Okay, here it is. Think about Beaver's life. You drive up, they almost have you driving up when they started off. The white picket fence, beautiful suburb, beautiful house. His dad, I think his dad's name is Ward. We never know what he did for a living. He seems like an architect or some kind of businessman. June Cleaver, you know, the only housewife I know, dressed to the nines, high heels, you know, looks wonderful every day. But, you know, she's working really hard. Very stereotypical kind of thing. But the point is, Beaver is this kid who has this wonderful set of assets. Because Beaver is very mischievous and he's problematic in many, many ways. But he goes to school, they take advantage, they look out for him. His dad works with them. They help him get through all of his childhood problems. We know he has an older brother who adds assets to him, Wally. Wally's friends are almost like, by any definition, like socially problematic. I mean, they are really troubled teens, right? But all of them seem to make it. Did you notice that all of them make it? Like they're able to get to college, they're counseled through, they're given advice. It's just an amazing set of things. And then when you think about the housing, that show came out in the early 1950s. So I saw it on a rerun in the 1960s. In the 1950s, what was going on in the United States? Major housing policy that was creating opportunities based through the highways and also through subsidies to create Beaver Cleaver's world in the suburbs. Amazing set of subsidies. The GI Bill also influenced that. Lots of money and revenue, making it possible for Beaver Cleaver to have the life that he had, which was amazing. Now, we turn to Education Next, which I really like. They do a good job. They're not politically correct. I really like. They're talking about family formation with African Americans and saying that, you know, basically African American males are disappearing, and, you know, the woman is left to raise the kid. That's what the picture's really saying there. But what they don't give us a real insight into is how did the lack of access in places like St. Louis to the housing policies influence the economic resources that ultimately influence family formation in an intergenerational perspective. They simply take us to this moment. They don't take us back to the actual evidence that has accrued over the years with respect to why do we have that and how come this guy got everything. So my question to you is, what would have happened if Beaver Cleaver was black? Okay? Well, I'm going to talk to you about Beaver Cleaver St. Louis style. Because Beaver Cleaver St. Louis style did exist. He probably would have been in these, I'm pointing to the screen, that's hilarious. He probably would have been in those projects. You know, everybody knows about the projects in St. Louis, right? Pruitt-Igoe scenario. We have very similar things here in Chicago. Robert Taylor, Stateway Gardens, Ivy B. Wells. They exist all over the United States. Right? It's not unique, but these were unique. Beaver would have been there. And point of fact, Rothstein talks about it in his analysis of Ferguson in this aftermath, that in the early 1950s, there were thousands of blacks who were categorized
as middle class and should have had access to a wide swath of housing across metropolitan St. Louis. But they were denied all of that. And what does that mean? So you take the 1950s to the 1960s to the 1970s to the 1980s, 90s, 2000, 2010, 2000, almost 20 now. Multiple generations of wealth lost because they were denied all of this. It's massive. So I don't even talk to my students about this stuff unless we had a conversation about what the heck happened historically to lead to that picture where you saw the kid holding the kid with the dad not being there. Because if you don't have that as a context, you're just going to take that as a given. That's not how this unfolded. This stuff was designed. It literally was created. And the big point I want to get at is St. Louis is not an accident. It's a design. So the big question is, how do us smart people figure out a new one? How do we refashion it? So what did they do? They had racially explicit zoning. They kept those middle class folks out in the 1950s. They had restrictive covenants. They had government subsidies for suburban expansion that was exclusive on race. You had urban renewal. You had denial of municipal services. Now that's a huge deal. It might not even seem like a big deal to you, but imagine if you have a community that doesn't have access to water. Today I was telling Steve, there are still places in North St. Louis where an ambulance will not come. You can call them and they will not come. So if you have denial of water, garbage pickup, and the like, what does that do if that appears in the newspaper? Imagine in 1960, they show your community with no garbage pickup and no water, and they put that on the front page of the St. Louis Dispatch. That's going to run more and more whites to the northern suburbs and the western suburbs. They're going to run. They're going to be like, these folks won't take care of the garbage. No, you won't pick it up. Okay, so this is what was happening, and this is archaeological dig we have to design it. All right? They had government-supported dual labor systems, which really still exist. We're getting a big geospatial investment in St. Louis. $1 billion of geospatial technology coming down there from the government. Well, in my opinion, it's a dual-supported labor market by default because no one's prepared to take advantage of it who's indigenous. You literally, I mean, they talk about it like it's a great thing. It's great for some people, but not for others. If you can't do math, you're not going to be part of this. So you had annexation strategies that were horrific. In other words, they took middle-class areas where blacks were living, and they wanted them out. So they annexed them, and then they raised the tax rates so that people couldn't afford it, and they ran them out, and then they put whites into the better communities. That happened all over St. Louis. That TIF is corrupt. I don't know how else to say it. Does everybody know what a TIF is? I mean, the TIF, the Brookings Institute says the St. Louis TIF is corrupt. They said the Kansas City TIF is corrupt. They're supposed to be using the funding to redevelop areas that are blighted, but they use them to redevelop areas that are in suburban areas that are already elite to build the Galleria and the upscale malls so that rich people can enjoy the landmass. And then they make the poor people pay the taxes on them. It's unbelievable. Like, you couldn't make this up. Like, I wish this was a fairy tale. But this is the kind of thing that happens in St. Louis, right? So you might say, what the heck does all this have to do with schools? I'm getting it. Don't be patient. Chetty and his colleagues ranked communities in terms of their upward mobility on income. St. Louis, and they ranked the top 50. St. Louis was in the bottom 10. The way they said is the odds of reaching the top fifth of the income percentile versus if you started at the bottom, and it's about a 5% chance of you doing that. I thought that was generous. If you're born poor in St. Louis and getting to a point of just being what we call middle class in St. Louis, I mean, I think it's nearly a miracle. Anybody does. So I think they got it right. I just thought it was kind of high. But it's right and it was affirming to see it in quantitatively. They argued that the communities that have more income mobility have less segregation, more stable families, better schools, greater social capital, and less income inequality. Well, St. Louis is one of the most segregated places in America, so you see why it's problematic. The schools largely, I'm going to get to this, the school game is corrupt. All right, so I want you to understand what I mean by that. There's accreditation bodies, the state is responsible for the schools. And I can't tell you, and I'm a social scientist, what the metrics that they use, why they even use them. I've asked them over and over again, like, what do these metrics even mean with respect to accreditation? But I'm going to get to that a little later, because it's fascinating. It's a real problem. So hold that one. What should accreditation metrics look like? That's one thing we need to have a conversation about. I need your help on that. What would you take as reliable and valid metrics for school accreditation? What do you think should be? We got to come back to that. Somebody gonna keep over my questions? Because I don't want to lose that one. All right. The other thing about St. Louis that is challenging is it's politically fragmented. So there are 12 counties in Metro St. Louis area, and there are 300 municipalities. There are 312 local governments, and there are about 12 local governments for every 100,000 residents. Now, to put that in perspective, Kansas City has, I think, Jackson County, and, you know, it's about the same landmass, just a few people, and, you know, they probably have, you know, like, well, no, let me not go there yet. I'm going to go here first. I'll compare. So this data is for the Metro St. Louis area. This is Metro St. Louis. That's how fragmented it is. It's just unbelievable. And I'm going to ask you a question. How does fragmentation happen? But if we compare counties, St. Louis County has 90 municipalities and separate police departments, mayor, city manager, and councils. They have 81 municipal courts in St. Louis County. Jackson County, which surrounds KC, is about two-thirds, has two-thirds of the population, but it's larger. It has 19 municipalities and 15 municipal courts, and it's less than a quarter. So that gives you a sense, even within the state, of the variation. So the question I have for you is, how do you get this kind of fragmentation? Where is this coming from? You're a social scientist. You should have that, like, in your head, like, that's on the first exam. How do you get fragmentation? I kind of have already told you. Well, segregation, right? So fragmentation and segregation are sisters. You know, they're related. So the more segregation you have, when people leave places, they start new communities, and they keep it going. St. Louis has done it on steroids. Like, there's no other place other than Pittsburgh. Anybody from Pittsburgh? Probably not, because you probably wouldn't be in school here. Because it's just a mess, right? I mean, so it's massive fragmentation, and it's all a part of segregation. And now, how do you keep? Is Chicago still in the running for Amazon?
How they say so.
Oh, that's really good. I'm happy for you. Well, we applied for Amazon too. And, you know, I was there when they were talking about the application, and I almost died laughing. How could you imagine if you're a corporation and you wanted to move somewhere, and you wanted to move to St. Louis, and you wanted to put your business right here in St. Louis County. What the heck are you gonna negotiate with all of these municipalities for all their rules and regulations and regulatory functions and all the nonsense they create at these city council meetings? Or are you gonna go someplace that's a big landmass, not fragmented? They're competing against each other in St. Louis County for business. And they have all these regulatory functions. You never move a business to a place that is fragmented politically. Ever. You only let Walmart go to those places, Walgreens, drugstores, but not big multinational corporations. Never going to happen, ever. You always pick big landmass over little. One government to negotiate with over 90. It's just common sense in business, right? So Kansas City has a better chance than us. You have a way better chance than us. Louisville and all these other places, Raleigh, Durham, all of them in the New South have made their land masses get bigger and fewer and fewer governments. So they don't compete against each other. They've lessened segregation by doing that. It has all these residual effects. So I've already answered one of your questions on the fix. Yeah.
So I'm just thinking about growing up in Minneapolis, which is one of the high fragmentation areas
Yes.
on your chart, and thinking, I guess I'm thinking about the segregation, which took a bunch of different forms. Religious said there were areas. There's one suburb, very well known, very fancy suburb that had no Jews whatsoever, and next to it was St. Louis Park, which is where I'm from. And other cities were other municipalities were they were segregated more, I guess, socioeconomically. There weren't too many black people at that time when I was going up there. There was a little bit on the north side. But, so what's really involved with that? Is it the real estate developers that are developing these areas that have these characters? And I mean, a lot of the suburban development is driven by these real estate developers, I think, and they have these, I've had a lot of experience since then in different places where they have these little planning committees and so forth, planning commissions kind of under their thumb, these developers. So is that how it happens? Is the mechanism through real estate? Or
So I love you want to deal with mechanisms. It's always real estate.
Yeah.
And this protection of property taxes, and basically the benefit principle in taxation is he who pays benefits, right? So the key is you can appeal to people politically by saying we're going to have a lower property tax rate, but because our property values are going to go high, we're going to generate good revenue versus the people who have a low, the property is not really worth a lot, relatively speaking, and they have to raise their property taxes up higher to generate comparable revenue. And you make the case that we don't want to go into any revenue sharing agreements with these folks, because on average, we're doing better with our model. And that's how you get the affluent suburb. And if they can then cut a deal and bring in retail tax, on top of that, you have the property tax plus the retail tax, all that goes into the school funding scenario. And then when it's time to move into an area, they tell you we have good schools, great property taxes, great revenue, no property tax, lots of tax revenue to pay for our schools, and we're not sharing it with the school district that's contiguous to us. It's a tremendous selling point. Every realtor will do that.
So the schooling interplay with the real estate.
You cannot divorce this from school.
Right.
It's 100%. I live in Clayton, Missouri. You have to be able to walk in and say the Clayton schools are the #1 school district in the state of Missouri. Here's your property tax rate. You're going to subsidize it. We're going to have income coming in, revenue coming in from retail and business. We're not competing against ourselves, and we're going to bound this off so that we're not sharing with Maplewood, Richmond Heights, because their property values aren't the same, and we don't want to share with them. And we'll fight tooth and nail. We couldn't even merge on garbage. We tried to have a merger on picking up garbage with our neighbors. They wouldn't do it because they said, next to the schools. You see? And so, I mean, that's the game. And so then what happens, in following up on your point, then you get tremendous disparities on how you have to generate revenue. Because if I have a municipality, I have to pay a police chief. I have to pay all of these people. I have to pay for the schools too. So what are you going to do? If your property tax and property values aren't high, then the only way to generate revenue is to fine people. You have to go out and ticket them for their grass is not right, or you're speeding in this speed zone. So Pine Lawn, North St. Louis, they have 63% of that municipality's revenue comes in from tickets. It is It is 0.61 square miles. They have 2,300 people. It's 96% black. And they gave out 17,000 tickets in 2014, the year that Michael Brown was killed. Normandy, where Michael Brown was from, or where he would have gone to school, where he went to school. 63% of the revenue comes in from tickets. I want to say, you have to understand that 22 other municipalities get 20% or more of their revenue from tickets. So stop, because I told you my first model was flawed. I had to admit it. It didn't deal with social relationships and race. What is going to be the relationship between the government and the people if they're ticketed all the time? Is it going to be positive? Is there going to be great police relationship? The police they're not going to be viewed in a positive way. Right? It's just not going to happen. So when everything happened with Michael Brown, people were like, well, we don't understand. Well, look, he's in Ferguson. They're literally being harassed. They set up the experiment. I know this is the world of randomization here, right? We randomize everything in Chicago, I'm sure, to get it right. They ran the studies where they had tickets that were given by hand and tickets that you had to electronically do. Like, when they did that, the disparities went away. All of a sudden, when it was electronic, it looked the same, you know, it's proportional to the community. When it's by hand, supposedly, or we just saw you speeding, it was like almost all black. So blacks were being clearly identified for these tickets and harassed in all of North St. Louis. And if there's 22 municipalities and you see a map, they're all in the northern sector. It's a mess. There's no trust, collective efficacy, right? I mean, that's your word. It's none of that. This is a serious problem. And now, there was an attempt to change this. The governor and the state legislature put a cap on the percentage of the revenue that could be generated from tickets. Unfortunately, the municipality sued and asked to get out of it, and the state Supreme Court agreed with the municipality. So now we're back to this kind of model again. So there's no trust at all. It's all broken down. So after I said we're going to get to school, so this is what it looks like, the enrollment in schools. And that's the northern sector, St. Louis Public in north. It's majority black. Anybody here? I know we have a couple of St. Louis folks. Any? Yeah. Okay, so you know this area. And then the further west, the western migration was where you saw more and more whites moving. And gives you a sense of what's happening. So where the tickets are happening, it's where all the black people are, and they're also in school. They're all being impacted. Like I think about, we're going to give police guns in northern St. Louis. They're already getting more tickets. I mean, we're going to give teachers guns. It's just going to be a nightmare. Okay. Then you have to start asking about money, because that's very important. So percent of households with no credit or underbanked, it's largely North St. Louis. And it's really tough the further north you get in St. Louis County. I think I mentioned to you, see, the irony is that North St. Louis, the part that's green, that area is very much like Olympia Fields in here in Illinois. Olympia Fields is above the Mason-Dixon line, has the highest income for blacks on average above the Mason-Dixon line in the United States. And North St. Louis, that green area, is second, right behind it. Because everybody has a perception that North St. Louis is just poor. It's diverse, it's largely poor, but there are areas of affluence there as well, relative affluence. So I won't bore you with the wealth gap. The reason we have a massive wealth gap in St. Louis is largely because people were denied the housing situation that we're going to have. Why does that matter? If you read Shapiro and all these other people who write about wealth and education, we even talked about it earlier today. The fact of the matter is, wealthy people can intervene on poor education. Even they intervene on good education. You just add on. I know in Clayton, Clayton schools were great. My kids went there. They had every AP opportunity, the whole 9 yards. And then we had test prep, right? For the ACT or the SET, they came after school and we paid for that. And then there was Kumon math, and I mean, they had every add-on that you could add on to add value, you dropped a dime for. So you already had the highest amount in terms of the school revenue, and then you add on your wealth, and you add all that on, and boom, it's crushing. In Clayton, where I live, they redshirt teachers. Do you know what a redshirting is? Do you all know football? Redshirt is when they take an elite athlete and basically say, we're going to give you another year to get bigger and stronger, and then we'll let you play, and it won't cost you anything. Well, we take teachers, have them train with us for a year. We won't let them teach anyone because they're not ready in our mind, even after they finish certification. And they watch and observe, and they go through an apprenticeship in the school district because we have wealth. We can do that. They're sitting on the bench waiting to get in the game. And then when we think they're ready, we let them teach. In the St. Louis public schools, they're taking any warm body they can get. In point of fact, the certification levels for middle school, math and science, which I really care about, I mean, it's like 30 or 40% of the people are permanent subs. You know, and we're redshirting, but they have permanent subs. Where do the companies go? This is huge. So I start with Ferguson because everyone says Ferguson doesn't have a major company. They're all clustered here in St. Louis City on the highway. Companies always cluster on highways. Does everybody know why? Transportation. It's a social thing. You got to be able to move supplies in and out. So that's a highway all the way across, and you see most of the companies are clustered across there. That means Wash U and SLU, we're right on the highway because we wouldn't build anywhere. We're not stupid. We make sure the highway is built by a major university, right? So we have all the businesses, everything in St. Louis City near us, and they're dispersed around, but they're all on major highways. But North St. Louis is largely depleted them. Now I told you that we want to be a biotech hub. I want more science and math in the community. I'm not going to get into GIS in this. I know. I'm just going to tell you there's a way for me to figure out whether it's random or non-random when companies cluster. Do you believe me? Believe, I need belief. So we tested that, and we tested it with biotechnology companies, and they do cluster. And this is important because for the rest of my research after 2008, I stopped talking about the municipalities. There's 300 of them, it doesn't make sense. Now when I talk to people, I just say, which biotech cluster are you in? Are you in the St. Louis cluster? Are you in the St. Louis County cluster, St. Charles cluster, or are you up in Earth City? Because then I understand better, you know, why I'm talking about math and science. And when I run my numbers now for, you know, state achievement tests and things of that sort, I run them all so people can see them by cluster. Are you able to participate in this endeavor that we're creating? If your math scores are low, or the science scores are low, or reading is really the one that predicts most things, we've got a real problem. And in the St. Louis cluster, they're very low. Very low. Food. Okay. And this one is, I see you eating, it's really good, nutritious. This is painful. Because in the areas that are red, which are in North St. Louis, Snooks is our major store. It's like Jewel's here, right? Is there still Jewel's in Chicago? That's when I grew up at Jewel's. There might be some other things around now. I saw some Italian names. Yes, that looks, yeah, that's really big here. I got it. So Snooks is our version of those two, all right? Snooks said it's an experiment to have a grocery store in North St. Louis. I mean, they're like, that's an experiment. Okay, so everybody here works in education. If I do not have food that's nutritious, what happens to my brain? And what happens to cognition? And what happens to achievement in the team? It's foundational, right? So, I'm going to come back to something about the brain later. But if this is a fix. But how do you fix it? How do you get a business to say, I'm going to come to your community and bring a grocery store? It seems like I should really be saying that in the developing world. But I'm not. I'm talking about a major city in the United States of America. So, you know, we all have to deal with death, but premature death is painful. I'm going to show you a few factors that are attributed to that. Many of them are social circumstances, behavior, environment exposure, healthcare. We don't control genetic predisposition, but some of these other factors we do, and it's very important because I make the case that the relationship between health and education, they're interdependent. And so we need to understand that. So the relative risk of death by income, the poorer you are, the higher your relative risk. I mean, it's almost like an axiom, right? So I've told you the concentration where the blacks are, and poverty overlaps with the black population in St. Louis. So North St. Louis, high poverty, high African American, and tough. Disease overlaps with those two. So highly correlated to heart disease, cancer death in those places that are largely black and largely poor. The relative risk of those diseases is very high, causing great trauma in families, very, very difficult to manage. Schooling is part of this deal about life expectancy. I always tell people it's better to flunk out of college than not to go. Just in relative life course, it's just go flunk out, it's okay. No, there are social things that are added to you, just so many things that you get from going to college. But right now, this is actually based upon St. Louis data that, you know, going to high school really didn't change much in terms of life expectancy with any college graduate about a year. So, life expectancy by zip code in St. Louis. Clayton, where I live, everyone lives to be 80, you know, on average 85. Really nice setup, great schools, #1 school district in Missouri, one of the top in the United States. Ladue, the same. You know, the further west you go, those communities very much look and feel just like Clayton. They're almost the same. And then when you go north and to the south, you see relative premature death. Tough. Then one thing about insurance coverage, the part that's really important, the county and the city have different plans going on. The county came up with an insurance plan for kids. The city didn't have one. When you see the relative scenarios for African Americans, insured and uninsured in the community, relatively speaking, African Americans are less likely to have insurance. The younger people are all largely covered, but their parents aren't. Why does this matter? Does anybody know about the relationship between families, children, and insurance? Okay, so my health colleagues have done the studies. When families have insurance, children are more likely to actually go to the doctor and benefit from the insurance. When the child only has the insurance, they're less likely to go to the doctor than the other situation. So when we have all of these battles about health insurance, this is really education policy. Because when families have health insurance, the kids have they get greater access to health providers. It's not when they have CHIPS. Like CHIPS is what we have. CHIPS is great, we need it. But CHIPS doesn't have the same effects as when families have insurance. It's a huge deal, especially in a place like St. Louis, because I'm going to show you why in a second. We think about prenatal situation, whites versus blacks. Really inadequate prenatal health care based upon the data we're getting, which means you're starting off behind. I'm sure you already had Heckman here, right? He's already broke that down, right? I'm sure. So I won't bore you. But, I mean, it's just a real big deal, and I'm going to come back to it later. It's something we could actually fix. The hospitals Okay, so this is my own research. It's just kind of a joke where the hospitals and the doctors' offices are. Doctors are, they cluster in a non-random fashion. Like they always are next to each other. They get synergy from it. They need transportation. They build off each other's expertise. So when doctors' offices, they want to be by universities, especially research ones. They do not want to be in a place that doesn't have a grocery store or other corporations. So it's a real problem for hospitals, but it's even more of a problem in St. Louis because the healthcare professionals basically are avoiding North St. Louis. And so there's a general shortage of healthcare professionals, according to studies that have been done. The ones that are most stark to me is that if you think about the density of population is really in North St. Louis, where they have way fewer physicians. In most areas in North St. Louis have fewer than 8 physicians per 10,000 residents. And when they weren't affiliated with healthcare centers at all, there were fewer than 5 per 10,000. Like that's really like a developing country. That's stark. So you think about a child, earache, the dentists are the same way. Toothache, anything that goes wrong, you already now are in a situation where the way your insurance is set up, you're least likely to go. And then there's less access to providers. It's a mess. Then we think about childhood mental disorders. You know, the distribution is pretty even across the metro area. It's a little higher. I picked mental disorders for a reason. It's going to become clearer in a second. But we have mental disorders in our community and population, a little higher in North St. Louis. But when we think about what happens if you have a mental disorder, it's stark difference. So if a white kid has a mental disorder, they're more likely to be served somewhere else. African Americans are more likely to be served in an emergency room for mental health disorders. Youth. This is a serious problem. Why is it a discrepancy? Mechanism. I don't have insurance. I don't have the right kind of insurance. There's already a shortage of psychiatric help in the community. There's certainly a shortage of physicians. This is a real problem. So now I'm having an issue. I don't have counseling. If I live in Clayton, I'm not going to the emergency room if I have a mental health problem. I'm going to a counselor. My parents are going to see that I'm taken care of. Huge difference. Inpatient, 77% higher inpatient, being hospitalized with a mental health condition in St. Louis for African Americans versus whites. I mean, that's just not the way this is supposed to be. So you have this problem in this discrepancy. So I always frame this because people were like, well, what was going on with Michael Brown? What was going on there? Well, he's a product of this. And so I picked mental health because it has implications for suspension. So Missouri, according to the Office of Civil Rights, is the suspension capital of America with respect to disparities on black-white suspensions. So we're number 1. Wisconsin is fighting for number 2. Indiana's right behind. That's interesting. We're talking elementary school suspensions here. And then when you look at it, the 6 highest suspending school districts in America, 3 of them are in metropolitan St. Louis. They're the St. Louis Public Schools, there's Normandy, where Michael Brown was from, and there's Riverview Gardens, which is a kissing cousin right next door. Those are the three of the 6 highest suspending elementary school districts in the United States of America. I'm going to wake you up in a second. In St. Louis Public, in the year that Michael Brown was killed, they suspended 1,400 elementary school students, 200 kindergarten kids, and 8 preschoolers. 8 preschoolers. The number 1 reason they were suspended was insubordination and disrespect. Now I'm going to get real. I gave a talk at a local black church about this. And you can do different things in the local black church than you do at the University of Chicago. But I'm going to be culturally ignorant right now. I showed them the data on why people got lynched. And the number one reason, when you collapse the categories, as we do as social scientists, is insubordination and disrespect. The schools are just continuing this. Right? So I have a mental health issue. I can't get a counselor because we don't have counselors in schools anymore. We don't have nurses. We don't have any of that unless you go to the Clayton schools, where I have a doctor, a trainer, traveling with the team. I've got all of that. But in a regular school, no nurse, no counselor, no doctors, no nothing. I got nothing. I'm institutionalized or central emergency room if I'm young and I'm dealing with issues. And then when I go to school, they just suspend me. That's what I get. So, all right, I'm segueing a bit, but I'm going to stay on this discipline issue because I have to have some math in it. I mean, so if you pulled your phone out and you said, Siri, if you have an Apple, you said, Siri, I want the weather in Illinois.
Here's the weather for Springfield today.
Siri will never give you the weather for Illinois, will she? She's going to give you a city. Like normally it would have said, here's the weather for Chicago. It's crazy they gave me Springfield. But Siri's never going to give you a state weather report. They've been programmed not to. It's just stupid. What do you need the state weather report for? You need to know where you're going. You need to know the weather report for the local place that you're going. Right? So GWR just gives you local weather reports. All it is a local model. You run it, it takes space in consideration, you know, and you can get a local model between variable relationships and see how relationships vary across the state. Because we don't need a state weather report. We need a local weather report. We don't, you know, what does it mean when they say Missouri achievement, you know, and I'm from Missouri, you know, I want to know what's going on in St. Louis, Kansas City, all of this stuff, you know, right? State structure. Simple enough. And there's an equation associated with it, which I'm not going to talk to you about, but you have the papers I sent, so you can go into all that, and we can talk about it later if you want. But I want to give you a couple of weather reports. So I became curious, is there a relationship between discipline and algebra scores? Just a simple model. You know, is there a relationship? Well, it turns out there are relationships across the state between discipline rate in high schools and algebra scores. And it's as you would figure, is the more discipline you deal with, the lower the algebra score. Right? But the only place where they're significant in the state are metropolitan St. Louis and Kansas City. That one up there is really weird because it's the higher the discipline rate, the higher the algebra scores. That's up in St. Joe. I don't know why that's happening. Can't explain that. But I think I might be able to get to this one maybe. But there's a negative relationship here. And if I look at percent minority and algebra scores in the state, the only places where they're significant are Kansas City, Metro, St. Louis, and this is the Boot Hill. How many of you know what the Boot Hill is? Anybody? The Chronicle of Higher Education just did an expose on the Boot Hill of Missouri. It's largely white, very poor. Buttresses, Arkansas, it's almost like Appalachia. I mean, they have this really tough situation. I want to talk more about that. Because we never really deal with that. Like, we talk about urban a lot, but the rural situation is very, very much the same. The Chronicle argued that there needed to be to reform education in the Boot Hill, you needed a public health intervention. I think that's what we need in St. Louis. But, yeah. And then when we go poverty, or free or reduced lunch, which is a poor metric, but it's the best I can get, in algebra scores, you see that the relationship is negative in a lot more places, including all the way from St. Louis all the way down into the Boot Hill and all over in Kansas City. So there's still a relationship between, free and reduced lunch and algebra. I think I have one more for this. Oh, graduation and free and reduced lunch. The only place that there's a relationship between the graduation rate and free and reduced lunch in the state is Missouri, St. Louis, and Kansas City. Fascinating. Okay, so now I have the temperature of my state. You have it now too. What should we do? Look at that. Care about graduation. So here's the pitch. St. Louis dropped or came up with $450 million to keep the St. Louis Rams in St. Louis. A losing football team that causes brain injury. They're winning now. They were losing when they left. Right? The civic capacity to do that was significant. The people that came on board for the land, the money, and the action included the most important people in our community. They were willing to keep a sports regime that at the time was really a losing battle. We already have, and I've explained to you, the segregation regime. What do I mean by regime? I'm simply meaning public-private partnerships to some end. Right? So we have public-private partnerships to advance sports. We have public-private partnerships that advance segregation. Is it possible in America to have a public-private partnership that protects the brain, that nurtures the brain? Is it feasible? Okay. So it would be wrong in the time that I have with you left to say we haven't tried. I'm going to give you a few examples of where we tried. Number one, we tried some form of regionalism. We tried interdistrict transfer in St. Louis with the desegregated Liddell. Amy Stuart Wells' book is classic description of it. We have school accountability. We have curriculum mandates. We have our corrupt tip. And we have the possibility of Medicare expansion. Let's talk about each one real quick. So this was the borough of St. Louis. You know, sadly, we can't get regionalism to pass. So what we did, because we couldn't coalesce the governance, we had a legal case after Brown, which was the Liddell case. They created the largest interdistrict transfer program in the United States of America. So students were able to leave the St. Louis public schools and go to Clayton or Ladue or whatever. They could transfer out. The effects were documented by Roz Mickelson in Ohio State Law Review, and a former colleague who I think is at Northwestern right now in economics. He used to be here. His name will come to me. Anyway, they documented the effects of this kind of transfer. It's very positive. You get better graduation rates, higher attainment on most measures. Students go on to have fulfilling careers. However, it is a legal case, and at some point, once it's been the mandates have been fulfilled, you're out of it. So we're now out of it in St. Louis, and it's voluntary. It's not by any kind of mandate from any courts or from the state. And the scope and scale of the wait list is in the thousands of kids trying to use the transfer agreements. There are no, I told Steve earlier, there are no charter schools coming to save any suburban area in America. Charter schools don't go to suburban areas. Mostly I'm talking to you about suburban areas. So that kind of intervention is dead. Doesn't happen. Only large municipalities, large cities really do that. So this worked. I'm throwing you a lifeline on your brain regime. What should we do? These are just the cases. I'm not going to go into any other, except for the fact that have you ever heard of the Turner case? Clayton versus Turner. This is must read for education researchers. Okay, so here's the case. Turner is a white family in the St. Louis public schools, dissatisfied because at the time, St. Louis Public, the dark, is unaccredited. And by state law, after the desegregated, the state put in, if you are in an unaccredited school district, by law, you have a right to go to a school district contiguous to the one in which you live. And you should not have to pay tuition. Now, the Turners were sending their kids to the Clayton schools, and they had been paying tuition. When they lost accreditation in St. Louis Public, they filed to have the money follow them to Clayton, so they wouldn't have to pay. The Clayton, this is embarrassing actually. The information director of Clayton basically stood on the steps of Clayton and said, "Hold on, you're opening the floodgates. We don't want your money and we don't want you here." It was like George Wallace in Alabama, right? At the days of the University of Alabama. Please, and he literally said, "You're opening the floodgates." And he was talking about not the white family, but you're going to open the floodgates for all these black families to come here, and we don't want them. Literally. So Clayton sued to not take the money. They said, "We don't want the money. We're going to bankrupt the St. Louis Public because our market quality is so much better than theirs. Everybody from the St. Louis Public is going to want to come to us, and that would shut their system down. And we don't want that, nor have we planned for this." Every district afterwards was flooded with applicants. Ladue, Kirkwood, all the elite school districts in the area were flooded with applicants from folks who had heretofore been in the deseg order, had been shut off because the deseg order had ceased and desist, and now they had access because their school districts were unaccredited. All right? This seemed to me, I was so excited as a social scientist. This was wonderful. Now, I live in Clayton. I knew they couldn't handle the capacity, but I knew they would have to do something. I figured they're going to have to do something to finally fix this mess. Well, what did they do? What do you think they did? You're supposed to be smart. What do you think happened? It's in the courts. It's being held up by 18 lawyers. What do you think happened? Come on now. This is America.
They took the Turners in?
You did what?
They took in the Turners?
No, two things happened. Do we have any economists in here?
Not today.
Darn. Okay, two things happened. One, people lobbied the state to change the accreditation standards. Two, the superintendents that were having the out-migration of students knew they were going to go bankrupt. So they lobbied the state to say, we get to pick which districts our students can actually go to. And guess which district they picked? The ones furthest away. Because who's going to send their small elementary school kid on a bus for 30 miles away? So the people who were actually in charge of helping the kids figured out an economic model to create a disincentive to send the kids away. And the districts that were receiving went to the state to say, wink, wink, change the accreditation requirements. Suddenly, within a couple of years, and Steve, this is amazing to me. I've seen districts get better when they pull students out of the denominator and their test scores go through the roof, right? They do that through citing them off in the system with another number, the Houston miracle, right? The Texas miracle. Or, you find a way to just move lots of people out of your district, and all of a sudden your scores go up, because the best way, easiest way to get your scores to go up is just to take out the lowest performers, right? In 2 years, these districts miraculously got better. And all of them are accredited today. Come on. They're the same districts that were unaccredited in 2014, in 2013, They didn't do anything different. They added no value at all. We just politicked and got the accreditation changed. Because the more affluent districts just didn't want the kids there. So that's regionalism at its best. The other thing we can do, okay, tell me again what time, when am I supposed to say?
Well, we're gonna get at 150, we're at 143.
Oh, I'm gonna stop you. Because then because I was getting ready to take you into a whole nother world. No, I'm not gonna take you into that world. It's a paper we did for education research on mandates and what happens, but because it's interesting. You can't mandate your way out of this problem. You have to add capacity. That's the end game. But I'll stop you because I want to know, what would you do if you were me? I'm in St. Louis. I'm talking to all the city people. How do we fix this? What do we do?